Duty, honor, country dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
The destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals.
Now, we are the masters of our fate.
Howdy, gents. Welcome back to another episode of the Wolf and Iron podcast. I'm your host, Mike Yarbrough, founder and curator of wolfandiron.com, and I'm glad you're here. This is our special man-to-man episode, a little something different we do from time to time, and this is basically me talking to you guys about something that's on my heart, something that I've got on my mind, and I want to share with you guys, and I got something personal and special to talk about today. My dad died just about a week ago. I don't know really how many details I want to give you guys on how everything went down, but I kind of wanted to talk through it a little bit. And because I've talked about my dad from time to time, he was an alcoholic for pretty much the majority of his life. And alcoholism is the thing that took him out. And but I have some encouragement in all of this as well, and I wanted to share with you guys. But to kind of give you an idea of how things went down, I got the call that I guess I had been expecting to get at some point since I was a boy. And it was always this idea, this sort of nagging thing in the back of my mind. I didn't realize how prevalent it was until really kind of recently. It had been on my mind a lot more. And I'd always expected to get a call of some kind where my dad has fallen down, knocked himself unconscious and bled to death before anybody could find him, or he'd gotten in a serious car accident or overdosed or something along those lines, and he was dead. And I got a call that was a little different than those, but it was last Thursday. Actually, no, 2 Thursdays ago. Sorry. That my dad was in a bad way. He had some internal bleeding, had been drinking really, really heavily for a number of weeks, and had gotten to the point where he had asked to go to the hospital and was really bad off. People could recognize, family members and such could tell. He lives in Memphis, or lived in Memphis, and or around that area rather, and but he lived with his mom and his brother, and then he also had some other family members that were pretty close by and checked in on him. And they had been encouraging him to go to the doctor for a while, but anyhow, he finally went. When he got there, he was starting to go into the DTs, which is kind of like a hallucinations and just fits when you're coming off alcohol. And basically he hadn't drank for a couple of days because he wasn't able to. His body couldn't handle it. And so I got a call Thursday night about 9:30 here in North Carolina time. And it was my aunt and my grandma, and they basically said my dad's in a bad way, and they don't know what's going on, but he's got some internal bleeding. He's been sedated to get him, because of the DTs and the fight that he was putting up. But the doctors were looking at him, and they'd kind of give me a call the next day and kind of fill me in. And I said, okay, I didn't know this was going to be serious or how serious it was. But they called me the next morning on Friday and said, basically we just need to know if you want us to try and keep your dad alive long enough for you to get here. And it wasn't necessarily a shock per se, but it was kind of realization. This is the moment's happening. The time has come. And I said, yeah, absolutely. Keep him alive, and I'll get there as soon as I could. So about 10.5 hours later, we got from Charlotte to Memphis, and saw my dad there in the hospital bed on a ventilator, hooked up with a number of IVs, basically giving him drugs to keep him not sedated, but really just to keep his heart pressure up and things like that. Blood pressure up. And he was unconscious, and he remained unconscious the entire time that I was there. Unbeknownst to me on the way down there was that I was in a place, being his son, and by Tennessee law, to basically make the final decision as to whether or not we would, kind of pull the plug, so to speak, how long we would, let him stay like this for and to have some of those difficult conversations with the doctors and whatnot. And, thankfully the whole family was in agreement. My dad would have been in agreement as well. He wouldn't have wanted to live that way, and he wasn't going to live much longer anyhow. His kidneys were shutting down. Liver had a mass on it, wasn't processing like it was supposed to. Had pneumonia in the lungs, and basically just without all the ventilator and the blood pressure stuff wasn't gonna last. And so I had my final moments with my dad, and it's one of those things where I actually thought that when I showed up, I thought, well, if I don't cry, right, I'm kind of thinking through this, that's probably normal, because I've been kind of grieving the loss of my dad in some way for many years. But I was open to just, whatever happens, happens. If I need to grieve, physically cry through this, if I need to have my last words with him, that's I'll do that. And, on the way down there, I thought if my dad dies before I get there, it would be okay. I'd be okay with that. I wouldn't feel like things went unsaid necessarily. And I think that may be true, but I wouldn't have processed it in the same way that I did when I was there with him, right beside me. And, guys, I freaking broke down, really, really cried because of all the things that didn't happen more than the things that did. Here I saw before me my dad, who I loved, but was just filled with shame. He looked about 20 years older and worn out, so worn out. And it was just a sad sight. And I just thought about, whatever kind of hope that I was holding on to as a boy, that was gone now. For him to turn around, for things to change, for us to have even a couple of months together, with him sober and things the way they ought to have been, the way he would have wanted them to be. So anyhow, my dad died, and it was sad to see, for sure. It's toughest thing to go through. I got to commend my wife. I'll tell you what, she has been an awesome, awesome supporter and woman and comforter through this whole time. I don't know if I've ever cried in front of her before. So I don't know what she was expecting to see or anything like that. But she didn't really hold up any expectations for me. She just said, I'm here for you. This is really about you and what you need to do for your dad. And she was true to her word and has remained so since we've been home. My dad was cremated, and so no funeral, nothing along those lines. He really didn't want to be an expense or a burden to anybody. But I did hear a couple of things, though, while I was down there with the family, just kind of talking about his mood in the last couple of weeks. And they would say, hey, let's get some friends to come over, for example. And he would say, no, I'm too ashamed of what I've become, and I don't want him to see me like this. And it was confirmation of something that I had believed was true, but I wasn't sure. And that shame was such a big part of what drove his alcoholism. That vicious cycle of, I'm not good enough. I'm ashamed for what I've done. I've got such a far road to go to recovery that it's even, what's the point, really? And just ashamed of who he was. And, that thought of shame really just kind of being the fuel for that, or alcohol being the fuel for the engine of shame, really. And just how powerful that is. And so visited with family, all that kind of stuff, as you might imagine. Got back home, and in the last couple of days, really the last week, it felt really strange. I've been sad from time to time. I guess I'm going through some kind of subconscious grieving type of thing. But I've just been drained of all of my optimism. Now, the last couple of days have actually been okay. I feel like I'm starting to bounce back, but I hear these things come in waves. But my optimism was gone, which was just really strange. I don't know if I've ever had that happen before. I'm usually very sure of myself and sure of my ideas, and I kind of got to be talked down a little bit into any business plans or ideas of future ventures and things like that. My mind's usually always racing on new things, cool new stuff that I want to do and get involved in. But it was just gone. It was like a totally different person. A slow, gradual kind of depression began to come over me. And had some friends pray for me. Had a lot of you guys pray for me, so I appreciate that so much. You guys that are on the group, the Wolf and Iron community, are out there. I told you guys what was going on, and I just got so many prayers, and it was so encouraging to see that. So thank you guys so much for that. And I had men pray for me when I got home, and so gradually I feel like I'm kind of coming out of it a little bit. But that's just been my experience. My first time going through this, obviously, has just been that strange, slow kind of cloud over me where I don't want to make any decisions. I don't want to do anything. I just want to sit on the couch and watch TV. It's really a sad sight. But the last couple of days, I've had this thought in my mind too. And that's why I titled this episode, Fight. Because I look at my dad's life, and when we got back to my grandma's house after he died, and we're flipping through the photo albums, and I'm seeing pictures of my dad when he's just a kid, and he's just a handsome, fun-loving boy with his brothers, with so much potential and so much future ahead of him. And if you were to go back in time, I just think about how sad it would be to go back in time and see that kid like he was, and just to know that the vast majority of his life is going to be spent ruined in shame and in alcohol, and he's going to miss out on so much, and he's going to die filled with shame, filled with regret, cutting his life short by at least 20 years, I would imagine. It'd be the saddest thing in the world. And I thought, the devil has got such a victory here over my dad. To take somebody like that, with all these promises and all this great character qualities and potential, and to take that life and just ruin it. And so, men, my encouragement here, and look, I'm no expert in this area of addiction, so I'm not speaking to that specifically. I've got small battles and small victories in my own way, but I've never been majorly addicted to anything, thank God. But my encouragement is this: men, you've got to fight. If there's a demon in your life, if there's something that has a hold of you, if you have an addiction that you're dealing with, whether it's drugs, alcohol, pornography, sex, food, whatever it happens to be, laziness, just pleasure itself as an addiction, you've got to fight it. And I don't mean just, oh, I need to cut back. You hear guys say that all the time, alcoholics. I just need to cut back. No, you don't need to cut back. You need to put this thing underfoot and bury it. You need to have complete victory, and you need to demolish this thing. Let me tell you what fighting doesn't look like. It doesn't look like taking the easiest road to victory. That's not a fight. It doesn't look like looking back on your life in 6 months or a year and going, if I'd only done this or this differently, and I'll go back and I'll try the exact same things again, and leading to the same repetitive failures over and over again. That's not a fight. That's a long, slow defeat of yourself, is what that is. Let me tell you what fighting looks like. If you have to pick yourself up or your family up and move them across the country and cut off all social media ties and all connections with family and friends and anybody who's ever had an influence on you, just so you can get your mind right. If you have to uproot your entire life, you do it. If you have to make your entire life about beating this thing, you do it. That's fighting. You should be able to look back in 6 months or a year from now and just smile and say, the enemy never stood a chance. Because the plan I had in place was to utterly demolish him so that there was no chance of victory on his side. I was assured victory on my side. That's fighting. You do whatever it takes to put these things underfoot. You defeat your enemy. You go to war with it, and you don't give up. And men, you don't have to do this alone. Not only are there many, many programs out there, but there are friends out there. There are people who love you. They may not be your close friends. They may not even be people that you know right now. It may be people that you need to meet. But you don't have to do this on your own, and you shouldn't. And if you're a follower of Christ, you ought to have the power of the Holy Spirit in your life to help you get on the right track and push you in the right direction. And you need to obey that spirit and that conscience that's telling you what to do. But men, you got to fight. Every one of us is going to have a day like I had with my dad. Unless something changes in science and we're all living for years and years and years and years, we're all going to be on our deathbed. And by God's grace, we'll be surrounded by people who love us, by our sons and our daughters. And they will either look upon you and they will either say, thank God for this man and for what he's done and for the example that he set and all the good that I can point to in my life. So much good that came from him. Or they will shake their head and they will cry and they'll say, if only things had been different. If only he had worked harder to overcome, you fill in the blank. If only he and mom had made up. If they had worked through the issues in their marriage. Or if he had overcome his alcoholism. Or if he'd gotten to the root of what his shame issues were. You don't want to be an if-only kind of father. You want to be celebrated. What is your legacy going to be? Man, I hope this is helpful. I never want another man to relive what I had to experience with my dad. My children won't have to. I know that. What about you? What has a hold of you that you feel like you have to always make compromises with? I'll cut back. I'll do a little bit less. It keeps creeping up. What is that thing? And is it keeping you from being the man that you ought to be and living the life, the one life that you've been given to the fullest? If it is, you got to defeat it. You got to fight. I'm still very much in the processing phase of my dad's death. I kind of feel like the paintbrush on the canvas instead of the painter, if we ever get to be the painter in these situations. I'm certainly not the observer of all of this. So I don't have the perspective that I wish I had, and I know one day I will. So I hope this is some encouragement for you. You guys know I'm an open book, and even in these matters, I try to just be as real as I can and invite you guys into my life. And look, if you've got some advice on this situation, on this issue of overcoming addiction, when you hear this episode, share the episode, but comment on it and leave some notes for some other guys that are looking on this thing and are saying, I need to know how to address these things in my life. And then encourage a brother. Be iron to some other man out there who you know has this problem. Don't be afraid to call him out on it. Let me just close by saying I can't thank you guys enough for the prayers I received and the encouragements I received from so many of you. I mean, hundreds of guys praying for me. It really uplifted my spirits and it just released me from the weight of the decision in so many ways. And so I appreciate you guys so much. And until next time, keep your powder dry, and may a fair wind be always in your sails.